in the prison, you see men who have convicted of very different crimes living next to each other.
Yeah.
Rapists, murderers, drug dealers, and then the fourth guy is somebody who was convicted of money laundering.
Yeah.
And to me, this is very. I'm not sure this is the best possible way of housing prisoners. What do you think about? I mean, as you said, with the child molester, they are bound to get in trouble with other people on the wing. I mean, should we mix burglars with rapists and tax evaders?
Well, the rapists tend to be on well, in my prison, they tended to be set aside as well. So
not in scrubs.
Not in the scrubs, no. People have always said that prisons are the university of crime, so that people learn how to commit crimes from being in prison. I don't think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics don't suggest it's true, and most people who go into prison, by the time they get into prison, most prisoners have committed a large number of crimes, at least under the present dispensation. The idea that the first, you go into a shop and steal a sandwich, you go straight to prison, that isn't the case. Yeah. So most people who are in prison have been convicted several times, at least several times, and often many times. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, when you consider that the rate of detection of all their crimes is very low. I don't know, you probably haven't talked to them about these kind of things. But actually, I found that if I talked to them and asked them in confidence what they had actually done, I found that they had done between 5 and 20 times as much as they'd ever been accused of having done. Mm-hmm. So the idea that innocent people are being corrupted by the presence of other criminals, I don't think is true. Mm-hmm. And actually, if it were true, the longer they were in prison, the more corrupted they would be. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm not convinced that it makes any fundamental difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You have advocated for longer sentences.
Yes.
Why?
Well, partly for the reasons that I have enumerated. First of all, let me make a fundamental point. The state, one of the reasons that the state exists is to provide security for its population. Mm-hmm. Therefore, preventing crime is not just in the same category as making sure everyone has 5 weeks paid holiday a year. It's of a different order of importance.
Yeah.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Secondly, people often forget that if it is true, and it is true, that most criminals come from relatively poor backgrounds with bad conditions. The same is true of their victims.
Yes.
The poor are victims of the crime, not the rich. I mean, true, someone can come into my house and steal things, but it doesn't have the same effect on me as it has on somebody who doesn't have insurance and has no means of replacing what is stolen, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah.
And since, as seems to be the case, the class of victims is very much larger than the class of perpetrators, i.e. perpetrators commit many crimes,
Yes.
then it follows that failure to incapacitate those who commit crimes is creating more victims.
So,
and when you look at the kind of arguments against imprisonment, people will say, oh, well, the recidivism rate is high, which is true,
yeah.
at least until the late 30s, when people stopped committing crimes almost spontaneously, apart from a handful. So in the end, they will stop committing crimes, mostly. Not 100%, but mostly. People say that, okay, the recidivism rate is high, and if you take the recidivism rate of conditions of non-custodial sentences, such as probation, for example, the recidivism rate is no higher. But this disregards two things. This is, well, more than two things. It's a completely bogus comparison. The first is that most prisoners have been through the probation system already. The number of people who are in prison for a first offence is very, very small. And actually, though, they're murderers who you can't really do anything else with them but put them in prison. But other kinds of crime, people do not go to prison for a first offence. They've already been through the mill of probation and so on. So that has failed to work with them. The second thing is the comparisons are always statistically bogus, because if you compare people in prison for 2 years with people on probation 2 years, while people are in prison for 2 years, they are not committing crimes, again, at least against people outside prison.
Yes.
People on probation do commit crimes, many crimes. Hundreds of thousands of crimes a year people are committed by people on probation. Now, the purpose of all this is to prevent crime, to protect people from crime. So it's quite clear that even a short sentence is more protective than probation.
No sentence, yes.
Then in effect, no sentence.
Yeah.
Now, now if it's true that most people give up crime as they get older, at least they give up committing the kind of crime they get caught for, which is, then it's clear to me that there's a very simple solution, actually, to relatively simple solution to at least quite a lot of crime. Because the fact is that not more than 5% of the population is committing the vast majority of the crime, even now, even though a larger proportion of people are criminal than was once the case, it's still a relatively small proportion of the population. So if you had longer sentences, I mean, I'm not proposing vicious sentences or anything like that, and I certainly don't approve of ill treatment of prisoners once they are in prison, and I'm all in favor of the kind of thing that you do, as I've already said, then it seems to me that we should be arguing for longer sentences. And if I can give you a kind of example to show you what is happening. I don't know whether the name of a man called Shane Jenkins means anything to you, but he put out the eyes of his girlfriend with his bare fingers and blinded her. Now, she was extremely foolish because he was obviously a very bad man. He'd just come out of prison, having served 4 years, I think, for seriously injuring, brain damaging another man. Now, the sentence that he received was having put out the eyes of, he got his girlfriend drunk, gave her drugs, and then with his bare fingers put out her eyes and blinded her. It's true, he got a life sentence, but with a recommendation that he stay in prison for 6 years, admittedly as a minimum. But if he was a good boy and said, you know, you know, I've done my anger management, and I now realize that putting people's eyes out with my finger is wrong.
I'm a changed man.
I'm a changed man. I'm never going to do that again. You know, well, I mean, he'll be out in 6 years. Now, if a man does a crime like that and is out in 6 years,
yeah,
what can you give? I mean, sentences have to be, to some degree anyway, proportional to the seriousness of the crime. What do you give to a burglar? Now,
yeah.
burglary is not a minor crime. I don't believe any burglary is a minor crime. It's a terrible thing for many people to have their house broken into and their things stolen or so on. But
yeah.
still, it's not the same as having your eyes put out with bare.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's this relentless downward pressure on sentencing. So the average, I worked it out that the average burglar, the average burglary draws a sentence to itself of 3 days imprisonment. 3 days. Mm-hmm. First, because many burglars are not sent to prison. Secondly, because most burglaries are detected. The police make very little effort to. I mean, you have almost to want to be caught by the police burgling in order to be found guilty of burglary. And incidentally, this is another very interesting and rather alarming phenomenon. There are many prisoners who prefer life in prison to life outside, at least for a time, not for the rest of their lives, but for a time. They find something better in prison than they have in their lives, which is a terrible condemnation, but of our way of life.
The outside.
Well, yeah, on life of the outside, but it is the case.
Yeah.
So the question, if it is true that the average burglary has 3 days in prison as a result, you can expect 3 days in prison now, and you've got to be a very bad burglar not to be able to steal at least 3 days worth of labor when burgling. The question becomes not why is there so much burglary, but why there is so little.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because there is no real.
When you divide the time served for burglary by the number of burglaries committed, the mathematics suggests that burglary is a good career choice.
Well, you could put it like that. And actually, I once said,
why bother working in a prison for £90 per day when you burgle houses, make triple that amount, and spend the same amount of time?
Well, I mean, this is a very interesting refutation of the idea of Homo economicus, that man just goes after his economic interests. And I once pointed this out it was in New Zealand actually, and a very clever lawyer when I said, why is it that so few people burgle? He said, it's they don't teach arithmetic in schools anymore. But and of course, we don't want a society in which the only reason people behave well is because there's a policeman around the corner who will arrest you if you don't behave well. Who wants a society like that? Mm-hmm.